Today what I've got are a couple speakers that don't even really fit into my normal filming area. These are the Paradigm Mini Monitor V.1s. I believe these came out in the early 2000s for a list price of like $300 to $350, somewhere in there. So still for today, equivalent to what you would see on the market right now. So let's take these apart and see what's inside them. I just realized I was talking for about 2 minutes while I'm doing these screws, and I was not even recording. So I will now recap what I just said without the camera rolling. I've had these speakers for about a year now. I got them for $30 at an employee auction from my work, which I think that's a steal of a deal for something like these speakers. They retailed back in the day, I think, they were sold in the early 2000s for about $300 to $350 for the pair, which is pretty comparable to what you'd pay nowadays for this style of speaker. They're pretty hot on the top end, around, I'd say 15,000 to 18,000 hertz. There's a big spike in the frequency response. There's quite a bit of ringing from these titanium dome tweeters. And I'll show a frequency response graph right now because there is one available online. So go and check out that website. As well as being kind of hot on the top end, that I find that at least my pair are kind of boomy in the lower end, probably around, I don't know, 80 to 100 something hertz. It doesn't show up so well in the frequency response graph, but I can hear it. And these speakers are more about home theater. I think Paradigm really goes into the home theater market more than the audiophile music listening market. And with the home theater, you're not really going for the best quality of sound in terms of the nature of the sound. You just want something that's going to put a smile on your face and have that wow factor. Excuse me. So let me try and get these drivers out here. If I remember from the last time I had this thing apart, the woofer is supposed to come out first, but it wasn't really wanting to come out this time. There we go. And, going on that home theater market thing, I think that's also why Klipsch does so well in home theater, is because even though those speakers aren't the flattest, they generally give you that wow factor that general audiences really like, even though it may not be the best thing for the audiophile community. All right, so there's that. We'll take a look at those in a minute. So here's the enclosure. I have made no modifications or adjustments, so this is exactly as it came from the factory. You get a couple of these really thin foam gaskets. You gotta be pretty careful with them, otherwise you will tear them. So as you might notice, this isn't your standard MDF. This is a very coarse chipboard, which I don't really like that much. I prefer the finer grain MDF, but it's not, you don't really see that. What you'll see is a nice big brace in the center. This enclosure is pretty dead because of that. And that's really nice to see that they put the extra time and money into this. I do also have a pair of Paradigm Mini Monitor V5s, and those do not have this brace in the middle. And there's a noticeable amount more ringing in the enclosure. I also think I haven't measured it recently, but I think this is 3/4 inch material. This isn't like that cheapy 5/8 stuff that you see in all the speakers nowadays, for cost reasons. So let's take a look at the drivers. I'll set this aside. All right, so here's the woofer. You can see it is a cast aluminum frame with a poly cone and no venting for the pull piece or the spider. But this is actually a pretty light woofer, so it doesn't, again, from my ear, it doesn't seem to store a lot of energy or ring after a note stops. These are, I think these are pretty good drivers. They also have some good weight to them. They're also made in Canada by Teardown. Everything Teardown does is made in Canada, at least back when these were made. So this is the tweeter. It's got a lot of weight to it. And again, this is titanium dome. The website I mentioned earlier is actually one that details how to remove this tweeter and replace it with a different one as an upgrade, although the website claims that it is, or the web page claims that it's repairing, not replacing. So they might have had some other problem. But again, it's a cool website. Go ahead and check it out. So let's get into the crossover now. You can see the tape there. I do like that these things come with serial numbers. The box, pretty much everything has the serial number listed on it, so it's all trackable, not like Teardown would really want you to be calling them up nowadays. It has your standard binding post cup. This is actually the same exact one that's on that clip that I did a little while back. If you haven't seen my clips video yet, you should go and check it out. I'll put a card up here for that. That video is more about the modification of it, because that's a cheaper speaker. I think it's a little more worthwhile to have fun with on your own. If you're actually going to do a real upgrade, these would be more worth it because it's, you know, better built from the beginning. The nice thing about all the stuffing is that they actually bothered to, you know, put some in there. The downside is it just gets all over the crossover. Huge mess. So here's the circuit board. Not the best soldering on these. There's like the pads or these terminals aren't even touching the board. It's all going through the solder. Not the end of the world, but as I said in my clips video, you don't really want your signal going through this sort of material anyway. So here is the crossover. You have an iron core inductor, air core, 2 electrolytic capacitors, and 2 sand cast resistors. I'll put up a more detailed photo of this as well. So here are the values. On the woofer circuit, you have a 1.5 millihenry inductor. You have a 33 microfarad electrolytic capacitor, and then an 8.6 ohm 10 watt resistor. On the tweeter circuit, you have a 2.3 ohm resistor, a 4.7 microfarad capacitor, and a 0.27 millihenry air core inductor. So overall, like the board is pretty decent quality for, you know, one of these crappy circuit boards. But still, if you want the most out of one of these speakers, you really need to upgrade these components to the, you know, the bigger, large gauge air core inductors, the, you know, polyurethane capacitors, and some higher quality resistors. If you're going to do that, you would definitely want to re-engineered the crossover to take away that high point in the top end. And that website I mentioned that modifies this, that's what they do. So I'll quick drop the schematic here as well. Actually, you know what? I forgot. That website had one, so instead of drawing one this time, I'll save myself the time and you the pain of watching me hand draw it, and I'll just put it up on screen. So, nothing fancy, as you saw there. These crossovers and speakers, they aren't magic by any means. They're passive components. They do what they do. One last note here is that the port is flared on both ends. So that's also nice to see, because if you remember in the clips, it was only flared on the rear. The inside was just the end of the cardboard tube. There's nothing really wrong with that as long as you engineer it properly. I've never had any chuffing problems on the R14s. And same here, I've never had any issues with with any chuffing problems in this speaker. These have performed very well for me. I think the only improvements you could make are maybe to soften these edges to minimize diffraction on the woofer, upgrade the components of the crossover, and really that's about it. I think these are some pretty solid speakers. The finish is nice. Just upgrade some of the cheap stuff. Well, if you've got any questions, let me know. If you'd like to see more speaker teardowns just for the fun of it, let me know that as well, because I've got a few more speakers. I wouldn't mind sharing the crossover designs in case you want to re-engineer these things. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Sorry, before I go, there was one more thing I wanted to mention, and that is just some of the specs of these, because I realized I didn't even go over that. So these speakers have a frequency response that on the paper goes down to 57 hertz. I think they can actually go down to kind of the mid 40s, like 45, maybe even down to 40 hertz. If you're just playing these alone, they do play pretty darn low. In my system, I crossed them over with my subwoofer at like 90 or 100 hertz. I can't remember off the top of my head. They're 80 watts for power handling. So, decently powerful, but not mega powerful. You'd think that with the size of this woofer and really the size of this tweeter too, they'd be able to handle a little bit more than 80 watts, but I mean, that's getting pretty loud. These things, they do scream once you pump some power into them. And they're crossed over at 2000 hertz, which is pretty high, actually. I'm not sure why they crossed such a large woofer so high. I think the R14s I did in my last video, those are crossed over at like 1850. If I'm wrong, I'll correct myself right here. But I didn't even think they crossed over quite that high. So hopefully there isn't any breakup in this cone from that. All right, now I think I've covered everything, so now I'll see you next time.